Our breaking story today, the man convicted of murdering 13-year-old Naziah Harris found dead in his cell.
On January 9th, 2024, 13-year-old Naziah Harris took her final selfie on a school tablet, smiling and waving at the camera. For her family, it was just a normal winter day, but the young girl had no idea this photograph would become the last recorded moment of her life. Instead of walking home after school, she got into a truck belonging to a man the adults considered a trusted family friend. This is a chilling story of years of manipulation, fatal failures by the child protection system, and a predator who took the coward's way out, carrying his darkest secret to the grave without ever answering the ultimate question: where is Naziah? January 9th, 2024, Detroit came in with that cold we all know too well around that time of year. For 13-year-old Naziah Harris, it was supposed to be just another plain old Tuesday, full of classes, laughing with her friends, and figuring out what she was doing that evening. Naziah was a student over at J.E. Clark Preparatory Academy, real active girl, loved her social media, and was always glued to her phone, staying connected. That morning, she got herself ready for school, putting some real thought into her fit. She was wearing a white sweater with a black jacket over it, and on top of that, a bright Rugrats puffer coat with that fur trim around the hood. She had on light blue jeans and her favorite red and black Nikes. Her hair was done up in two cute little braids pinned into buns, and she was wearing those trendy clear frame glasses. Surveillance cameras caught the exact moment she stepped onto that school bus. Just a normal child who had no way of knowing that morning was the last time she'd ever see the light of day. At school, Naziah was acting like her usual self, but that day, her digital footprint left behind something that would later break everybody's heart. For her schoolwork and talking to people, she used a tablet the school gave her, and that's what she used to take her very last picture, a selfie that's just going to heavy weigh on her family and investigators forever. In that picture, Naziah is smiling, waving right at the camera. Later on, Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy pointed out that the wave just looked like a sweet little hello. But knowing what happened next, you just can't look at that photo the same way anymore, because without even knowing it, that became the final recorded moment of her sweet life. All through the school day, Naziah was using that tablet to text somebody her family thought was completely safe, a man named Jarvis Butts. The last message went out around 3 p.m., where this baby girl was asking him to come pick her up before classes even let out, telling him once he confirmed he was there, she'd delete his number. Later on, those words took on a whole different, dark meaning, because behind that innocent little favor was a calculated setup to draw her right out. When the bell rang, Naziah walked out of school in the same clothes she put on that morning and got on the bus heading home toward the east side of Detroit. Around 3:15 p.m., the bus pulled up near Cornwall and 3 Mile Drive, and witnesses saw her get off right at her usual stop, a spot she'd used 100 times before. But instead of walking on home to Bedford Street, where her big family was waiting on her, Naziah got straight into a truck belonging to Jarvis Butts. And from that second on, her life was swallowed up by a nightmare folks are still trying to make sense of on those cold Detroit streets. Butts' sister would later testify in court that she saw a girl looking just like Naziah getting out of her brother's truck near his auto shop over on Connor Street that exact same day. And honey, that was the last confirmed time anybody ever saw Naziah Harris alive. Meanwhile, back at the house, panic was starting to set in. Naziah wasn't the type to just disappear. Her school attendance was spot on, and her social media, where she was always posting, just went completely dead silent. Her grandmother and guardian, Annette Harris, noticed she wasn't home around 6 p.m. Despite the freezing cold and how dangerous this city can get, the family tried searching for her themselves first, calling up friends and running the streets. But by the next morning, January 10th, when they saw her bed was still cold and empty, Annette called the police. A whole massive search operation kicked off with police, volunteers, and family combing through snowbound streets, abandoned houses, and down by the Rouge River. Nezaya's daddy, who was real sick at the time, was out there every single day pushing through his pain, using the last bit of strength he had just to find his baby girl. But Detroit stayed dead quiet. This city, as used to loss as it is, wasn't giving up a single clue about where this 13-year-old child went. It wasn't until later, when detectives started digging into cell tower pings and digital data linked to Butts, that they finally began piecing together what really went down that day. While her family was sitting by the door praying she'd just walk on through, the evidence was showing Butts was already steps ahead, covering up his tracks. Winter in Detroit kept right on moving. Cars kept rolling down snow-covered blocks. Folks were going home to their loved ones, and Nezaya's family was still standing there waiting. But that baby was never going to cross that threshold again. All that was left from that day were a few digital traces, one last smiling selfie on a school tablet, and a heartbreaking question her family still ain't got the answer to. Where is Nezaya Harris? Looking for that answer is what brought detectives straight to the people who were around Nezaya long before she went missing, and out of all the names coming up, one kept popping up over and over again: Jarvis Butts. Now, on the surface, this didn't look crazy at first. Butts wasn't some random stranger who just popped up out of nowhere right before she vanished. He had known her family for years, was up in their house all the time, and was somebody the adults in her life trusted as part of their circle. But when investigators started peeling back the layers on who Jarvis Butts really was and what was going on between him and Nezaya, they uncovered a disturbing story that started way before January 9th, 2024. Now, look, whenever you hear about a child going missing on the news, folks automatically picture some dangerous stranger hiding somewhere in the shadows, right? But the reality of what happened to Nezaya Harris was far more complicated than that. The man investigators focused on wasn't an outsider at all. He was someone who had been around the Harris family for years. Jarvis Butts was 43 years old when all of this unfolded, a Detroit resident who presented himself as a trusted family friend, the kind of person who always seemed willing to help. But later, prosecutors described him very differently, calling him a skilled manipulator who built relationships with adults in order to gain the trust of the young people around them. His connection to Nezaya's family ran deep. He had children with her aunt and had known members of the household for many years, giving him a level of access that investigators later found deeply concerning. He wasn't just an occasional visitor. He was familiar with the family's routines, knew the children's schedules, and had earned the confidence of many of the adults around them. But when investigators examined his background more closely, they found a long history of legal troubles stretching back to the late 1990s. Among those records were convictions involving offenses against a young person, which resulted in his placement on Michigan's offender registry. What shocked many observers was that some adults connected to the family were already aware of parts of his past. During court proceedings in 2026, testimony revealed that concerns about his background had been known for years, yet he continued to maintain a presence around the family. To many of the children, Jarvis was simply known as Uncle, but investigators later argued that the trust placed in him created opportunities that should never have existed. According to prosecutors, he spent years building influence and confidence with those around him, gradually strengthening his position within the family's inner circle. Judge Aliyah Sabri spoke critically about decisions that allowed Nezaya and other young girls to spend time at Butts's auto shop on Connor Street. The location gave him opportunities to interact with them away from the supervision of others. Investigators also concluded that Nezaya was not the only young person affected by his behavior over the years. Testimony suggested a pattern of conduct involving multiple children within the extended family and social circle. As time went on, witnesses described behavior that they found increasingly concerning. Several testified that he frequently sought opportunities to be around the young girls in the household and sometimes took an unusual interest in Nezaya's personal belongings. Investigators also discovered evidence that he maintained private communication with her and encouraged secrecy surrounding those conversations. By the time his trial began in 2025, prosecutors argued that the evidence showed a deliberate effort to gain influence over a young girl and maintain that influence over an extended period. Judge Sabry noted that the evidence presented in court demonstrated planning, awareness, and intent. According to investigators, he used emotional manipulation to create a sense of trust and exclusivity, even encouraging Nazaya to save his contact information under a personal nickname in her phone. This part of the story is more than a record of court proceedings. It serves as a reminder of how dangerous situations can develop when warning signs are overlooked and trust is placed in the wrong person. Investigators argued that Butts's role in Nazaya's life was not the result of chance. He remained close to the family for years, and during that time, concerns that might have prompted intervention were never fully addressed. Yet some of the strongest evidence did not come from witness testimony or family recollections. Instead, it came from digital records, phones, messages, and electronic data that documented interactions over time. When detectives eventually examined the contents of Butts's phone, they uncovered what prosecutors described as a detailed timeline that helped investigators better understand the nature of the relationship and the events leading up to Nazaya's disappearance. When Detroit investigators began looking into Nazaya's disappearance, Jarvis Butts initially appeared unusually confident. He voluntarily handed over his phone to detectives and suggested there was nothing for them to find. What he may not have anticipated, however, was the extent to which digital evidence can remain recoverable. Forensic specialists examined the device and reportedly recovered more than 500 gigabytes of data, along with hundreds of deleted messages that had not been permanently erased. What investigators uncovered provided a detailed record of communications spanning several years and became a major focus of the case. According to court records, those communications dated back to September 2022, when Nazaya was just 11 years old. From the beginning, investigators said many of the conversations contained requests for secrecy, with repeated instructions encouraging her to delete messages after reading them. Over time, prosecutors argued that this pattern helped create a private channel of communication that remained hidden from the adults around her. As the months passed, the messages became increasingly concerning. Court testimony described a growing pattern of inappropriate communication and emotional influence directed toward a young girl. Investigators said the exchanges revealed a relationship that went far beyond what would ever be considered appropriate between an adult and a child. By 2023, the messages reflected a dynamic in which Nazaya often appeared worried about disappointing him and sought reassurance from him during difficult situations. One of the most troubling parts of the message history emerged in the fall of 2023. Court records showed conversations in which Nazaya expressed fear, confusion, and uncertainty about personal issues she was facing. Rather than seeking help from trusted adults, she repeatedly turned to Butts, suggesting a level of dependence that investigators later viewed as deeply concerning. Prosecutors argued that these conversations demonstrated how much influence he had gained over her and how isolated she had become from other sources of support. By late 2023, the communications reflected increasing emotional distress, and investigators noted that many of her messages revealed anxiety about situations she felt unable to discuss openly with family members. According to testimony, Butts continued communicating with her while making little effort to involve responsible adults or seek outside assistance. Then came January 9, 2024. Investigators determined that the final messages exchanged between the two were sent shortly before school ended that afternoon. Records showed Nazaya asking him to confirm that he had received her message and indicating that she intended to remove his contact information afterward. He responded with a brief acknowledgement. Prosecutors later argued that those messages helped arrange a private meeting that became a critical part of the investigation. After reviewing thousands of recovered communications, Judge Sabry described the content as deeply troubling and noted that the evidence revealed a prolonged pattern of manipulation and influence. Investigators said the messages demonstrated that Nazaya had not simply disappeared without explanation, but had been drawn into a situation shaped by years of private communication and emotional control. Yet the messages were only part of the evidence. Detectives also examined search records and other digital activity connected to Butts's devices, uncovering additional information that investigators believed showed how events unfolded in the days surrounding Nazaya's disappearance and what actions were taken once attention began to focus on him. When investigators examined the large amount of data recovered from Jarvis Butts's phone, they discovered far more than a routine search history. Prosecutors later argued that the records revealed a detailed sequence of online activity connected to concerns he was facing at the time. According to evidence presented in court, investigators believed Butts was aware of circumstances that could expose his actions and began searching for ways to avoid the consequences. As analysts reviewed the data, they identified searches related to reproductive health services, medications, and various products that he appeared to be researching online. The search history also included inquiries about substances that investigators considered highly concerning. Among those were searches involving automotive chemicals and their potential effects on the human body. Forensic experts testified that some of these substances can cause severe medical complications if ingested, and that the search activity became an important part of the investigation. Prosecutors argued that these searches were not random and suggested they reflected a growing effort to address a situation that was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. Judge Aaliyah Sabri later noted that the evidence pointed to a series of deliberate decisions rather than a sudden accident or misunderstanding. Investigators reconstructed the events of January 9, 2024, using cell tower records, surveillance footage, and witness testimony. According to the timeline presented in court, after exchanging messages that afternoon, Nazaya left school and was later seen entering a vehicle associated with Butts. By approximately 4 p.m., location data placed his phone near his auto shop on Connor Street, where a witness later testified to seeing Nazaya that same day. Over the following hours, investigators tracked movements connected to Butts and others through phone records and travel data. Evidence showed multiple trips between different locations before returning to Detroit later that evening. By 8:22 p.m., phone records placed Butts back near the auto shop, a location that became a major focus of the investigation. Prosecutors argued that this period represented one of the final confirmed points in the timeline involving Nazaya. Later that night, records showed Butts checking into a motel in Harper Woods. Investigators testified that the location was familiar to him and became another key area examined during the case. He remained there until the following day, and authorities later focused significant attention on both the motel and the auto shop while attempting to determine exactly what had occurred. After January 9th, Nazaya was not seen again, and her phone stopped generating activity. On the night of January 10th, as family members and investigators searched for answers, location data associated with Butts's phone led authorities to an area near the Rouge River. Search teams, including federal personnel, were deployed to examine the surrounding area. During those searches, investigators recovered several clothing items that prosecutors later connected to the case. Testimony indicated that the items appeared to have been placed there relatively recently, drawing even greater attention to the location and its possible significance. As the investigation continued, prosecutors argued that the evidence revealed a pattern of planning, concealment, and deliberate decision-making. They pointed to digital records, travel data, witness statements, and recovered evidence as pieces of a larger picture that investigators spent months assembling. Yet one of the most difficult questions raised by the case was whether the warning signs had appeared long before January 2024. Court records suggested that concerns and red flags dated back many months earlier, leading investigators and prosecutors to examine not only the events surrounding Nazea's disappearance, but also the circumstances that allowed the situation to continue for so long without intervention. When investigators reconstructed the events leading up to Nazea's disappearance, one difficult reality became clear. The warning signs had appeared long before January 2024. According to court records and official reports, there were several moments when concerns were raised and opportunities existed for intervention. One of the earliest documented alerts came in April 2022, when Nazea was just 11 years old. Child Protective Services received a report involving concerns about Jarvis Butts' interactions with young girls at a birthday gathering. The report referenced his criminal history and registry status and included Nazea among the children mentioned. CPS forwarded the information to the Detroit Police Department and requested further review. However, later examinations of the case suggested that critical details may not have received the attention they required. According to testimony and reviews conducted afterward, information connected to Nazea did not result in a follow-up that might have uncovered additional concerns. Former law enforcement officials who later examined the records described the situation as a significant missed opportunity. Police representatives acknowledged the challenges involved in handling thousands of reports each year, but many observers argued that important warning signs should have triggered a more thorough response. As investigators looked deeper into the case, attention also turned to the environment surrounding Nazea. Court proceedings revealed that Butts maintained a close relationship with members of the household and was frequently present in the family's daily life. Witnesses testified that he had regular access to the children, was familiar with their schedules, and spent considerable time around them. Judge Aliyah Sabri repeatedly questioned how such extensive access had been allowed to continue for so many years. Testimony showed that children were sometimes sent to help at locations connected to Butts, creating situations where he could interact with them outside the direct supervision of other adults. Court records further indicated that concerns regarding his background had been known to some family members for years. Investigators later argued that these circumstances allowed him to build trust and influence without facing meaningful restrictions. Additional court proceedings examined broader concerns about conditions within the household. Testimony and documents presented during hearings described a challenging family environment and raised questions about supervision, support, and the overall well-being of the children. Prosecutors argued that these circumstances may have contributed to Nazea feeling isolated and uncertain about where to seek help when she faced difficult situations. Investigators believed that this vulnerability made it easier for someone offering attention and reassurance to gain her confidence over time. One of the most troubling moments identified during the investigation occurred on the morning of January 9, 2024. Witness accounts and records indicated that Nazea appeared visibly distressed at school that day and was seeking assistance. According to testimony, she asked to speak with a counselor and appeared emotionally overwhelmed. Looking back, many involved in the case viewed that moment as another opportunity when additional intervention might have changed the course of events. Instead, the day continued, and within hours, Nazea would disappear. As court proceedings unfolded, Judge Sabri described the case as a tragic example of multiple systems failing to respond effectively to repeated warning signs. The investigation prompted renewed discussions about communication between child protection agencies and law enforcement, eventually contributing to legislative efforts aimed at improving coordination and ensuring reports receive more comprehensive follow-up. For Nazea and her family, however, those changes arrived after the fact. By the time the case reached court, prosecutors argued that years of overlooked concerns had already led to an irreversible outcome. as the trial moved forward, attention shifted to the evidence against Butts and to the question that remained at the center of the family's search for answers. What exactly happened to Nezaeh? And where could the final pieces of the truth still be found? In February 2026, right as the case was heading to a jury trial, the moment Nezaeh's family had been praying 2 long years for finally came. Jarvis Butts, who had been swearing up and down he had nothing to do with her disappearance, suddenly folded. On February 12, 2026, inside a Wayne County courtroom, he officially pled guilty to second-degree murder, along with a string of sexual assault charges involving other young girls, the youngest being just 4 years old. Make no mistake, this plea wasn't out of remorse or a change of heart. It was a cold, calculated move to save his own skin, because a first-degree murder conviction carried a mandatory life sentence without parole. To avoid dying behind bars, he agreed to a 35 to 60-year sentence, but prosecutor Kim Worthy and Nezaeh's family demanded one non-negotiable condition. Butts had to give a full, truthful confession revealing the exact location where he hid Nezaeh's body. On March 12, 2026, the courtroom was packed with tension. Butts sat there in a green jail jumpsuit and a paper mask, keeping his head down and refusing to say a word while Nezaeh's family poured out their grief during victim impact statements. Her grandmother, Annette Harris, sobbed through her words, saying her heart would never heal. Things got so heated that deputies had to drag several people out after Butts' supporters started shouting disrespectful insults at the grieving family. Judge Nicholas Hathaway handed down the sentence, a minimum of 35 years before he could even think about parole, meaning he wouldn't even be eligible until 2059. But what was supposed to be the beginning of closure for this family, finding their baby and giving her a proper homegoing, turned into an absolute nightmare just 2 weeks later. After sentencing, Butts was transferred to the Charles Egeler Reception and Guidance Center in Jackson, Michigan, for evaluation. On the morning of March 26, 2026, corrections officers found him unresponsive in his cell. Resuscitation efforts failed, and it was confirmed that Jarvis Butts had committed suicide, dying just 14 days into his sentence before ever stepping foot into a maximum security prison. The family's reaction wasn't relief. It was pure anger at a final act of cowardice from a man who destroyed their lives and then robbed them of their final answers. Nezaeh's cousin, Roxy, who had been the vocal leader of the search for 2 years, called his suicide a punk move to escape accountability, telling reporters, "He made his bed, now he has to lie in it," making it clear nobody had an ounce of sympathy for him. But behind the anger was a fresh wave of agony. With Butts dead, they couldn't verify if the river coordinates he gave prosecutors were even real. The Detroit community was furious, feeling like the justice system let that baby down all over again, with community activist Tamara Liberty Smith stressing that a vague statement like, "I threw her in the river," wasn't enough. DPD issued a statement promising to keep searching the Rouge River using the clues Butts left behind. But with every passing day since that snowy January in 2024, the odds of bringing her home get slimmer and slimmer. Jarvis Butts died a coward, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and leaving her family in a permanent state of painful waiting where every phone call brings a mix of hope and heartbreak. 13-year-old Nezaeh Harris, known for her bright smile and beautiful spirit, has still not been found. The legal case might be closed on paper, but for her family, true closure won't come until they can lay that sweet girl to rest. The tragedy of Nezaeh Harris isn't just about one sick predator. It's about every single moment where the adults and the system turned a blind eye to a child in danger. When you look at that last photo of Nezaeh smiling and waving at the camera, you see a sweet girl who, despite all her silent pain, was still looking for love and safety in this world. But the reality she faced was cold and cruel. A bureaucratic maze where a 13-year-old baby's cry for help got lost in the paperwork. The most painful lesson from this whole nightmare is that we have to listen to our children when they speak up. Nezaeh wasn't silent, y'all. She left a digital paper trail. She reached out for help, and she literally laid on her school floor crying for a counselor on the very day she vanished. Yet the grown-ups who were supposed to be her shield failed to react to the glaring red flags right in front of them. A detective's laziness in 2022 and her guardian's silence weren't just administrative mistakes. They were the building blocks of a tragedy. Jarvis Butts took the coward's way out in a Jackson prison cell, leaving behind only silence and that haunting question that still echoes through Detroit. Where is Nezaeh? Her remains have still not been found, and that is a heartbreak no family should ever have to bear. Real justice isn't just locking up a monster, it's building a world where no child is left to fight off a predator all by themselves. We cannot let this sweet baby's memory fade away. Nezaeh Harris deserved love, protection, and a full life that was robbed from her. Let her story be a wake-up call to every single one of us. Trust your gut, don't ignore the red flags, and always, always stand up for a child in trouble. The world keeps spinning, but we must never forget the name of the little girl that the system and the adults failed so miserably.